All right. Apparently the eraser is not working on the board anymore. We're going to go ahead and get started. And I have made the decision, because I can and want to, that we are going to continue this series. So I'm not going to try to rush to get it done by the next couple weeks. We're going to go into the next quarter because I want to focus really heavy into the work of Jesus when we get there. But we've been following the presence of God through the story of Scripture. And we kind of started off with, Genesis in the beginning. God created the heavens and the earth. He created the Garden of Eden, right? We were made in His image. We were made to be image bearers. We were made in the garden, not garbage. We are walking with God, and sin came in, right? Sin has separated us, so God allowed the world to kind of go its own way, really, till you got the Tower of Babel and flood and things of that nature. And so God calls out a people for His own choosing. He calls out Abraham. He establishes a covenant with Abraham, and a part of that covenant is that God would be faithful even in the midst of Israel's unfaithfulness. And so you see this covenant being restored, right? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to the point where we kind of really talked about last week, when Moses comes on the scene, and Moses is told that I am, right, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and as I was with them, I will be with you. And yet now, though, there is a change of relationship. I am going to tell you my name. And this name is going to be very significant as we go throughout, especially when we get into God's going to put His name in a city, in a place, in a people. But the point is, God says, I'm calling you out so that you can be a kingdom of priests, right? A kingdom of priests. And so that is their job. But who is God mainly speaking with, or really only speaking with up to this point? Who's the only interaction with God? In the Exodus? Moses. Moses is kind of this spokesperson, right? Moses is the one who goes in the tent of meeting. And whenever Moses goes in the tent of meeting, all of Israel kind of goes out of their tent and kind of sits around and waits. But Moses is the one who speaks. So much so that you get, like in the story of Numbers, Miriam and Aaron wanted that special relationship with God. And were they allowed to have it? No. And He basically told them, you be okay with your lot. But at the end of Deuteronomy, as we'll see, nobody had the relationship that Moses had with Yahweh. So there's a very special relationship that Moses has with God that it seems as if no other prophet will have until there comes one who would be in the likeness of Moses. And that's why when I harp on that a lot, especially in the time of Jesus, the gospel writers, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, are trying to get you to understand that Jesus is the new Moses. He is the new David. He is the new Israel. He is the fulfillment of all the really awesome things that God has done with His people. Jesus is all of it incarnate. The fullness of God dwelt in bodily form, and He came and He walked among us. And that's what we're pointing towards. We're pointing towards a time when God would come and be among His people. So whatever presence, and this is one of those neat things, whatever presence we have through Jesus is greater than what Moses saw at the burning bush. Whatever access we have to God that through Christ is greater than what Abraham heard and saw. And yet there are many, and I don't know if you are like that, who would, man, it'd be really cool to be at the burning bush. It'd be really cool. But you got to understand, go in the time of Moses when he cannot see all the events of history unfold that we have seen, we're able to see, and see the time of Jesus coming. And he's going off of a faith that is actually more a shot in the dark, even though he's hearing the voice of God, than I would say ours is. We have a completed, this story has panned out. right? Moses lived amongst other gods who all had their story. That was my point last week. They all had their story. They all had their war champions. They all had their prophets. They all had their creation stories. They all had these great, huge battles that God's won for the Egyptians and, for the pharaohs. What makes your God so special? Right? Well, what makes our God so special is when he says something, it always comes true. It always comes true. Now, some of the distance between the promise and the fulfillment of those promises can be many hundred years in between. We have the benefit of actually being there for the fulfillment of those promises. And that's what the Hebrew author is really trying to get at, right? In the Hall of Fame of all these people had these promises. Most of them never saw them come to fulfillment. We looked at Abraham as the father of faith. He never saw the promised land. He wasn't even close to the promised land. He never even saw the evidence of us like Moses did. Moses never entered the promised land, but he at least saw the evidence that, hey, we'll be there one day. Abraham never even started that process. They weren't even big enough a nation yet to conquer and to take over the promised land. So, what I want to ask to kind of get our minds going a little bit, what is the hardest part of a changing leadership? And this doesn't have to necessarily be religious. This can be in any really sphere, but specifically in churches or religion or anything like that. What are some of the complications that come with the changing of guard when it comes to leaders?
Getting people to follow the new leader.
Okay, getting people to follow the new leader. So, right, I would say the trust in the new guy, right? Trust. Anyone else?
Preconceived ideas.
Okay, so some preconceived ideas, right? Opinions get in the way. I'm going to just use that. Right, our opinions on, I remember when I was young. Some days, man, I feel 80. Some days I still feel 20. So, and then I fall playing football and hurt my shoulder and realize I'm not 20. The moment you step into somewhere, a new position, not just talking about preachers, but as a preacher, walking into a new church, you don't know anybody, whatever, and you're just looking out and you're just knowing everybody's kind of like just looking you up and down. Well, he's 24 years old, right? That's when I came here. I was 24 years old, right? He doesn't have, his children are, still in diapers, right? He hasn't lived life, right? And I would agree with that. But the opinions that come in, right? He's from the north. He's from the south. He's from Arkansas. He's from California. He's from, Californians, we just leave them off over here a little bit. Oh, hey, Raymond. And we have these preconceived notions, right, of leadership, which clouds our ability to do what? To trust. Anyone else? What else? Fear of the unknown. Fear of the unknown, right? What is this guy going to do? Right? How is he going to lead?
Meeting a standard.
Huh?
Meeting a standard.
Meeting a standard. So I'm going to use comparison. Is that kind of where you're going? Well, how is he much like the?
Whether you like the previous leader or not.
Yeah.
Fill your sheet.
Yeah. So you got the comparisons going on, right? He doesn't do it like so and so does. He doesn't do it like those types of things. Anyone else? Huh? In what way? Oh, okay. All right. So coming in, right? Who are you to tell us? We've been here, right? My parents, have been here, started this congregation or, this organization or this. I've been here from the beginning. Oh, really? 80, 33? You were there? Okay.
Jesus had that exact situation.
Yeah.
Who are you?
Who are you? By what authority? And which, that's not a bad question. I'm not saying all of these are necessarily wrong. This is just the challenges of bringing in new leadership. Now, this relevance, because we're going to start getting into Joshua today. Moses has been the guy. Before Israel even put their faith and trust in God again, Moses was out, talking to God at the burning bush. Every step of the way up until the promised land, everything that Moses said was from God, and they just listened to Moses. Now, did they always listen to Moses? No. Did they always put their faith in Moses? No. Did they challenge Moses? Yeah. Did they challenge God? Right? But even then, there is a comfortability with knowing you may not like the leader, but some people would not want to change the leader just because at least we know what to expect out of Moses. At least we know what to expect. I mean, Moses was an old guy by the time, he was 80 years old before he even began, right, really working with and during that time, that's an old guy during that time. 80s, young chicken, today's world. But let's go to Deuteronomy. Someone read Deuteronomy 34, 9 through 12. And this is gonna be important when it comes to the presence of God, and you'll see why in a moment. Someone read Deuteronomy 12. Last week we struggled with the microphones a little bit. I would ask that we do a little better this week. Who would like to read? Don wasn't here to be the runner either, though. Who'd like to read? 9 through the end of the chapter. Or Deuteronomy, not 12. What did I say? Deuteronomy 34, 9 through 12. We're close. It's in the same book. Oh, no one's running the booth. Just start reading really loud and I'll get the iPad.
And Joshua the son of Nun was full of the spirit of wisdom, for Moses had laid his hands on him. So the people of Israel obeyed him, and did as the Lord had commanded Moses. And there has not arisen a prophet since in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. None like him for all the signs and the wonders that the Lord sent him to do in the land of Egypt, to Pharaoh and to all his servants and to all his land. And for all the mighty power and all the great deeds of terror that Moses did in the sight of all Israel.
Okay, hopefully you read what I asked you. I didn't hear. So Joshua comes in. And at the very end of Deuteronomy, we recognize Joshua is not Moses. And actually, Deuteronomy lets us know that there's nobody who's going to be like Moses. There's no one going to be like Moses. And one of the reasons why I think that's really applicable is because we had Jesus come and walk on this earth. And imagine being led by Jesus. Now we're being led by people who are trying their best, who are trying to be Christ-like, but they're not whom? They're not Jesus, right? And so there's kind of a very similar aspect in the sense of we're all trying to follow Jesus. Really, everyone's following the word of Moses. Israel was following, Moses gave the law. Moses was the one who communicated with God. He gave all the commandments. He wrote it all down, obviously coming from God, right? But Joshua is not going to have the same relationship with God that Moses had. Joshua is not going to be going in the tent of meeting all the time the way that Moses did. It's going to really transition to the priests, and the priests will now be the ones. That's the whole book of Leviticus, because I think that's one of the reasons why at the end of book of Exodus, they build the tabernacle, and the cloud fills the tabernacle, and Moses cannot enter into it. Because God is basically preparing the people. Moses won't always be here to be your spokesperson. And so he sets up a system with the Levites and the priests who will be the teachers of the law, who will be the ones who guide Israel. Right? But we find out real quick, like the first story after the priests are dedicated, Aaron, his two sons do what? Immediately. They all throw off strange fire, right? They die. Now we bring in the Day of Atonement. The Day of Atonement analyzes or addresses the issue of sin, covering the tabernacle, preparing a place where God and man can meet together. And that's very important in this topic. Because when Jesus says, I am going to prepare a place, the whole story of Scripture is there a place that can be unstained by sin and remain unstained by sin, where God can enter and man can enter and we can walk with God again? By the way, the Day of Atonement had more to do with cleansing the tabernacle than it had to do with cleansing the sin of Israel. Okay? It had more to do with cleansing the tabernacle. It was as if the sins of Israel infected the tabernacle all year. Aaron would go, or the high priest would go in, and then, he would offer his offering for himself first, then he would go in, and he would put all the sins that had accumulated on the tabernacle onto a scapegoat, and he would send out it into the land of Beelzebub, the goat, right? The goat demon. Anyway, and so this is what's going on. Now, Moses is gone. Moses is gone. Can you imagine being Joshua? Can you imagine trying to be Joshua? One, Joshua is one of the few people who were there at the very beginning when the spies were originally sent into the land. He was one of the 12 spies. He was one of the two. Him and Caleb were the only ones who proved their faith. But I kind of imagine a Joseph story. Right? What happens when there's that one person who does the right thing, right, and everybody else doesn't? There can be an appreciation. There should be an appreciation. But what often happens with the ones who don't do the right thing? And this, by the way, this identifies Israel history their entire life. What happens when a prophet comes in and tries to be the self-righteous man to tell us what to do? They stone him. They kill him. And so Joshua has this challenge. So God deliberately, let's go to Joshua chapter 1. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' assistant, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now therefore arise, go over this Jordan, you and all this people, into the land that I am giving them. To the people of Israel, every place that the sole of your foot will tread upon, I have given to you, just as I promised Moses. So this is one of those cool things. All these promises are found way before Joshua. Joshua's just picking up the promise and moving into the next generation. How do we take promises from long ago and continue to live them out? And I think as time goes on, that gets more and more difficult because we're so far away from the original events. Right? Trying to get people to really appreciate what Jesus did to the world and what Jesus brought into the world can be difficult because we're so far removed. We grew up, at least in this country, who's been so influenced by Christianity. But imagine just being in the 1st century AD when they go, hey, remember that Jesus? Oh, yeah. We all heard about that. We were impacted by that. I mean, the things that Rome did and the Jews did to try to shut this man up. They killed him. Not only that, they crucified his followers. They continued to persecute his followers. It was one of the most mass executions done to someone's own people during that time of any. Now, Rome did that to other nations, but its own citizens, people who were under their own protection, that didn't happen on this kind of scale. So much so that, they were even blamed for the burning of Rome, right? The city of Rome. And so there was a lot of persecution, but we're so far removed from the events, we're reading it, and there are times I've read it, this is way back, is this really real? But if you were to talk to these people, they had grandparents who lived that out, who said that was real. We lived that. So we're dealing with people who, yes, they were not there originally with Moses, a lot of them. A lot of them were younger, right? But they had they had gone through the wilderness for 40 years. And so it's a new generation coming along. And what God is trying to do is, are you going to follow Joshua like you followed Moses? Hopefully a little bit better. But watch what he says. He says, from the wilderness and this Lebanon, as far as the great river, the river Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites, the great sea toward the going down of the sun shall be your territory. Now that was a promise to Moses. No man shall be able to stand before you all the days of your life, just as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not leave you or forsake you. That just as I was is the same phrase that God says to Moses about just as I was with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Just as I was with Moses, Joshua, I will be with you. And I sometimes, this is really the point of the class, can that phrase still be used to us? Just as I was with Moses, I will be with you. I would say the New Testament teaches us what you have is greater than what Moses had. What you have is better than what Moses had.
We have a better law based on better promises with a better leader.
Yeah. And the promise is being fulfilled. I mean, it's the same promise, just fulfilled. We have them, they are fulfilled in our end. Which means now our promises come to the eternal kingdom, which they had as well, right? But just they never saw the coming of the Messiah. They never saw the kingdom come, right? This was a lot they didn't see. But we have them fulfilled, and we have a relationship. There was a restored relationship that we have that even Israel did not have when they could see the fiery cloud. So when it comes to leadership, what we need to be most concerned about is, are they with God? Are they our greatest criticism of those who are leading, especially a congregation, whether it be elders, preachers, deacons, a person over a committee, I would say even far as that, is this a person who puts their sole trust in God? Because what Joshua's going to have to learn, hey, I'm giving you this responsibility, Joshua, but who's the one giving Joshua the land? Who's the one preparing the way? Who's the one who's going to give him the strength and the courage? God's going to. Right? Everywhere your foot goes, I have already given it to you. But you would think then that everything would be very easy for Israel to take over the promised land.
It seems like this trust issue has been the issue that God has had a problem with from the garden, from the very beginning. It's been about trust. Don't eat of the tree that's in the middle of the garden. They don't do that. We leave the garden, creates the laws. The laws they're not able to keep the law. It's always comes down to, do we trust God or not?
Yeah. And see, the law, and this is, okay. Way to make your point.
Mic drop.
Yeah.
Literally.
One of the really cool studies I've been doing for probably the last 2 years is a study on the word faith. And the word faith, man, the way it's used in today's world is nowhere near what it's used in the New Testament. Trust is a close word. Trust is a really good word that we talked up. Allegiance is probably the best word. This idea of allegiance. Do you have allegiance in God? Not just do you believe that He exists. Israel never gave up their belief that Yahweh existed. They never gave that up, and yet He says, you lost your faith. How can they lose their faith when they still believed in God? So this idea of trust, and really where the law comes in, and this is an interesting idea. What is the purpose of law? Huh? Well, in general, I mean, there's sort of several different ways you can answer that. So one is to keep you in line, okay?
For your good. Every law that God has ever created is for the good of us.
All right, for good. Of the lawkeeper. To protect others. So that's interesting, and I've brought this up before, but there's a guy who studies all these ancient documents and all these ancient laws. And by the way, the covenants and the laws that Israel had is very similar to laws of other Canaanite, Mesopotamia areas. A lot of similar features. It's probably why you see some weird laws in there that we're like, we don't understand that, but that would have been a universal principle, a universal law of Hammurabi, all those types of things. The one thing that the law of Moses has different, that beats out, no other law even has it close, is the love of neighbor and the protection of women. The protection of women and the love of a foreigner, the love of the sojourner, the taking care of those who could be enemies in your territory. The taking care of. No other law has that. That's what separates the law of Moses above all of these other commandments and all these other laws that are out there. Love of poor, right? Love of all those types of people. That's not in your other. You mistreat the poor. You take it's a get and get more kind of situation. I won't go into the Law of Hammurabi. That's really cool. But the Law of Hammurabi basically was the guy who originally wrote it. Hammurabi sort of wrote a lot of it, but he had one of his prophets, seers, who wrote most of it, even after his death. It was basically a king was able to interpret those laws. A new king would come in and basically he could reinterpret those laws every time he read it. And so it really had no consistency to it. Okay? And it could be used in a way that was very fluid. What we're seeing in this law, and we're going to look at a couple things, there is no fluid nature. There's going to be no fluid nature to the law. It's not going to be, well, Moses interpreted it this way, Joshua's going to interpret it this way, David's going to interpret it this way, Isaiah's going to interpret it this way. That's why a lot of times they're going back to these commandments and saying, God said at Mount Sinai, or God said when we came out of Egypt, or God said, right? It's a universal principle. Now, part of this is, do you trust me? I mean, there's a lot of different things you can look at with the tree in the middle of the garden. Why would God even create a law? That it just seems so, like, why even put that tree there? He doesn't have to put a tree that's full of the knowledge of, that if you eat the fruit, that tree could not have existed. What's the point? Do you trust me? I'm going to dangle the carrot in front of you, right? And really, I'm the kind of guy, if you tell me not to do something, my curiosity goes crazy. Like, why am I being told not to do this? What about this? But it seems as if Adam and Eve didn't really have an issue with it until Satan came around and goes, have you considered the tree again? Right? Almost brought it to their attention. And he's kind of going, what is it about that tree? Why did God tell us not to eat it? Well, he knew that if you ate it, you would become like him.
And why did God give Satan that information?
What information?
About the tree, the power of the tree, that if they ate of it, they would be cast out of the garden. I mean, I doubt if Satan knew that at the time. But those are questions like that you ask that gets down to the heart of why did God do what he did? Do we trust him?
Yeah.
To just accept what he says. And he never gets angry at we have the right to question God. We can question him. He's questioned all the time. Even Abraham even bargained with him.
Yeah.
So we can ask questions, but I think it's like anybody that is our superior or our guy, or like in the case of being a kid, you gotta be careful how you ask your questions to your parents. Don't become accusatory. Don't start questioning their motives.
Yeah, so it's kind of like, Israel will test God in the wilderness, and he gets completely angry at them. But then Gideon will test God, but in a way that he's not wanting to test God, hey, let's see if you can do this magic trick. He's really wanting to make sure what he's about to do is from God. And I think God takes those two different people, the one who's testing with a stubborn heart and the one who's going, God, I just don't know if this is going to work, right? Please, I need something to go on. And now, once again, you got to realize Gideon has now lived in a tumultuous environment in Judah where they were constantly in and out and in slavery and out of slavery, and God was sending judges, right? And so you just imagine the environment you're living in, right? And so I think God understands it. But law, keep you in line, and I think these go together. To keep you in line is not necessarily to keep you in line, but it's to keep you safe. Right, man, why do they put speed limit signs on these streets? I'm going to tell you right now, there are speed limit signs, and there are people who drive 70 miles an hour, and I'm talking this road right here, Myers Road. You ever been down Myers Road? You ever been going by somebody who's driving too fast down that road? Use it like I drove bus on it every single morning, and I'm telling you, I was scared to death. Almost every morning, there are people going to work, and they must have left, they had to get there in 15 minutes, and they only left with 10 minutes of time, and they're flying, and there's no room to fly down that road. I couldn't imagine if there was no speed limit whatsoever, and people just took whatever speed they wanted to. Now, there are some people, because they care for their safety, right, would drive it anyway at a reasonable speed, but it's for us, right? It's not to just keep you in line, but it's for the good of you, and it's to protect others. But ultimately, this comes down to, if you're going to be a good lawkeeper, do you trust the lawmaker? Do you trust the lawmaker? And getting back into Joshua, let's go back over here real quick. He says, I will not leave you nor forsake you. That's verse 5. Be strong and courageous, for you shall cause this people to inherit the land that I swore to their fathers to give them. Only be strong and very courageous. Be careful to do according to the law of Moses that my servant commanded you. Do not turn from it to the right hand or the left, that you may have good success wherever you go. You see that? God's desire, don't turn from the law. Why? So you can be the most successful person that you can be. So you can have the most blessings. It's almost God's like, I'm giving you opportunity here, and I'm actually cheating. I'm giving you the cheat code to life. Here's the cheat code to life. Do this, do this, do this, and don't do this. No other nation has this. You have the cheat code. What are you going to do with it? And what do? Sometimes they do well. Other times they don't do so well. Right? This first city that they're about to take, what was God's law? What was God's rule about this city? This first city is mine. Why did he do that? Did God want to own a city? Did he care about Jericho? Want to be first. Do you trust that if I give you this one, that I'll also give you every single one after that? Trust me. Trust that I'll do it. And this is your proof. This is your testing ground. This is your wilderness again. You went through the wilderness and you failed once, right? That's your testing ground. This is the next generation's testing ground. And the funny thing is, what does he ask them to do to take this city? I mean, to me, it's the silliest. It's almost like God's like, you know what? Go stand around your head and, do 3 spins and, and I'll answer any question you ever wanted. And it's like, why would I do that? I don't know. The God of heaven is telling you to do it. And if he says to do it, because he'll do this for you, why not? It's the same question Naaman comes up with, doesn't he? Naaman the leper? Why that lake? Or why that river? Why 7 times? I don't know. But if you want to be cured of your leprosy, you came to the person who can do it, why don't you just do it? So a part of trust is not always understanding why, but understanding who's telling you to do it. Understanding who's asking this of you. Understanding, and that's what they're going to have to learn. That's what they're going to have to understand. And 7 different times, he's going to tell them to prepare. Prepare, prepare, and you will have your possession. You will have your possession. You will have your possession. Prepare to possess. Consecrate. Make yourself holy. Set yourself apart, and you will have exactly what I promised to give you. And the only reason it works, God's saying, is because I am with you. 7 times he's going to have to remind the people from chapter 1 to chapter 6, I am with you like I was with Moses. I am with you like I was with Moses. I am with you like I was with Moses. And that's exactly when we're talking about changing of hand with leaders. I think as leaders, they have the responsibility, a new leader, especially a new person coming in, saying, hey, it's not me against the other guy. It's not me against the other, regime. It's not the new elders versus the old elders. We're all trying to do what? We're all trying to do what is right with God. May have some different ways of going about that, right? Joshua is not Moses. Joshua is not Moses. You think Joshua's going to say things differently? Do things a little bit differently? Right? But he is doing what? Exactly what God has asked him to do. Right? And he's going to do the best that he can. And so, we go through all of this story, and I'm not going to go through Rahab because I've talked about that over and over and over and over again. I want to go to chapter 5 real quick. And this is a really important part to me. This is a really important part to me in this story of Joshua. Because they've now taken Ai, right? Or Jericho's about to fall. Jericho's about to fall. They haven't taken to Ai. But watch what Joshua asks this commander of the Lord's army. Moses saw God at the burning bush. Joshua meets the commander of the Lord's army. And there's going to be a similar conversation. When Joshua was by Jericho, he lifted up his eyes, and behold, a man was standing before him with his drawn sword in his hand. And Joshua went to him and said to him, are you for us or for our adversaries? And what does he say? No. I am the commander of the army of the Lord. Which is really interesting. Because if he would have answered, I am for you, then the story of Rahab wouldn't make a whole lot of sense. Because Rahab is a member of the city of Jericho, and what's going to happen with Rahab and her household? She's going to be saved. Who am I for? I am not for anybody. I am for the Lord. And whoever is for the Lord, I am for. And so when they go in to take Jericho, the first thing they meet these spies, and these spies save them, and they go in and they save these spies, and Rahab becomes a part of the family of Jesus, right? The point of Israel, this goes back to a question I asked you, what was God trying to make them again? A kingdom of priests? People who would bring God into the world. And Rahab is the story to me that epitomizes the presence of God going with God's people. Hey, we heard what God has been doing for you, the God of heaven. We know that he is the God. Like Rahab says that, we know he is the Lord of heaven. We know that he's the Lord of heaven. We know he's the one that's protecting you in the wilderness. Now, most of the city is scared and want to try to kill you or run, but I want to be a part of it. I want to be a part of it. Can I enter into this family? Can I enter into this relationship that you have with God? And those 2 spies, do you know what their response was immediately after they left Rahab? We know for sure that God has given us this city. We know for sure that God has given us this city. Because that interaction with a foreigner, of a Canaanite with an Israelite, would not have happened if it wasn't for whom? If it wasn't for the Lord. And with our interactions with people, we need to understand that God is at work. There are times like, how did I get speaking to this person? And how did this, who but the Lord? Right? And so when God's presence is going with us, strange things will happen. Strange things will happen if you are doing what? If you're actually following, if you're going where God is leading you, if you're active in God's army and service. But if you're not, it goes, well, it don't happen to me. Well, they can't happen if you're sitting on your couch all day. They can't. They won't. They won't happen if you're not looking for them. They won't happen as with Joshua. Was that the first or second? Oh, I'm thinking I have 5 more minutes. They won't happen if you're not preparing yourself. That's what most of our Christian life is, preparing ourselves so when we have these interactions, we are ready. Okay? All right. I almost said what I said to my kids. Love you guys. Good night. I do love you. Hope you have a good night. Most of you.